Well, all the updates from Sudan now, Rohit.
Yes.
Sudan's warring military factions, they have agreed to another, this time, in fact, a longer 7-day ceasefire from Thursday onwards. This announcement was made by South Sudan, which offered to mediate in the ongoing conflict.
Yes, important developments there. The diplomatic efforts have intensified to end more than 2 weeks of war in Africa's third largest country. However, the credibility of the reported May 4th to May 11th ceasefire deal between the Sudanese Army Chief, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, and paramilitary Rapid Support Forces leader, General Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo, was unclear, given the rampant violations that undermined previous agreements running from 24 hours to 72 hours.
Right now, meanwhile, the United States State Department says that it is optimistic that reports of a ceasefire extension will hold in Sudan this time.
No ceasefire is perfect, but what we feel confident about is that these ceasefires, the subsequent ones, including this most recent extension, have led to a reduction in violence. And they have led to a reduction in violence that have allowed
Sudan's warring generals have agreed to send representatives for negotiations, potentially in Saudi Arabia. If the talks do come together, they would initially focus on establishing a stable and a reliable ceasefire. Both the sides have agreed that they will not fire unless they are fired at, or if there are any other kind of military movements.
Now, Sudan's war has forced at least 100,000 people to flee over its borders to neighboring countries. A broader disaster could be in the making as Sudan's neighbours like Egypt and Chad grapple with the refugee influx here, Rohit.
Yes, in fact, so another ceasefire deal being agreed upon. The question here, Haim, is whether this ceasefire will hold after all.
Right, absolutely. I believe all eyes are on the two military factions,
yes,
just to see if the warring generals will come to the negotiating table here.
Yes, so that's what the world is watching. And staying with Sudan, it's been 3 weeks since fighting broke out there, despite a 7-day truce being agreed between the warring parties, hoping to put an end to weeks of bloodshed.
Now, thousands of Sudanese have been forced to leave their homes, as I mentioned earlier, and take refuge in neighboring countries. But what poses as a major challenge here is the perilous journey.
Yes.
And in our next report, we look at how residents of Sudan continue their travel to unknown countries.
In the scorching heat, people are fleeing Sudan as they try to evade the fighting, leaving everything behind: their livelihood, houses, clothes. And amid the lack of official support, Sudanese are relying on the help of fellow citizens to flee.
We moved on Wednesday from Khartoum. It was very difficult. We were 28 people. The boys don't have a visa, but we kept them. Our suffering is unprecedented. We left under the fighting, clashes and artillery. It was a real suffering.
For the past few weeks, there is an unrest in Sudan. Explosions have rocked the Sudanese capital, Khartoum, and many other parts of the northern African nation. The confrontation follows days of tension between the armed forces and a powerful paramilitary group, the Rapid Support Force, or also called as the RSF. The friction between the two forces continued to create havoc in the country. The airstrikes and raging artillery battles have emptied the streets and disrupted civilian life. Thousands of people are fleeing the country. Some are going to South Sudan. Others are taking refuge in Egypt, Ethiopia and other neighboring countries, while some have even left by boat from Port Sudan to Saudi Arabia. According to the UN, more than 100,000 refugees have crossed from Sudan to neighboring countries to escape the conflict. The plight of these people is very upsetting. Mothers are struggling with their children in the scorching heat to reach a safe place, away from the gunfighting in a hope to find shelter over their head and food. Meanwhile, people from around war-torn Khartoum are finding safety routes to cross the border and reach Egypt. They have been walking on foot amidst the rising temperatures. The temperature on the Sudanese-Egyptian border can go up to 40 degrees Celsius. The constant fighting and gunfire have made people prone to extreme conditions, which also includes staying in a crowded truck for hours as long as they are safe.
For WFP, our biggest concern right now is actually that if the conflict in Sudan doesn't stop soon, the ripple effect across the region is significant. It's a real concern, and we just need to find peace. We need the two parties to the conflict to come together and find a way to resolve the conflict, because this has the possibility of destabilizing the whole region.
The United Nations have warned that the situation is now turning into a full-blown catastrophe, pointing out as to how the spillover effect of the crisis in the region is a matter of serious concern. Guterres has also sent Martin Griffiths, the UN Emergency Relief Coordinator, to the region in order to explore new ways of providing immediate relief to millions of people whose lives have been turned upside down by the ongoing fighting in Sudan. Amid deadly fighting in Sudan, the World Food Programme is also lifting the temporary suspension of its operations. The suspension was put in place after the death of 3 World Food Programme members last month. Bureau Report, WION World is One.